Welcome, everybody. Welcome to today's live online event brought to you by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Thanks for joining us in welcoming back birds with this special Migration in Your Backyard live event. We're just going to let people join here for the first little bit um, because there's a lot of people in the waiting room and a lot of people on the YouTube live stream, and it's really exciting to be able to share this with you guys today. My name is Charles Eldermeyer. I'm from the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, and I'll be your host for today's conversation with two special guests from the Cornell Lab who we'll welcome in a moment. So, as you're joining, feel free to throw where you're joining from into chat. And if you have any favorite birds, or if you're have any favorite migration experiences you want to throw in there, these are the sorts of things we're going to be talking about today. This is not a lecture. This is an opportunity for us all to get together, celebrate the birds that are returning to our backyards, to our green spaces, and just enjoy being part of a community and learning. I want to remind you, if you enjoy our time together today, and if you like hearing about birds and bird migration and other things, please keep connected to us here at the Cornell Lab. You can help support our mission to conserve birds and biodiversity in part through events like these to celebrate birds and the bird watching community. We have several people helping in the chat in both Zoom and on YouTube. So if you have questions and you're watching in Zoom, please use the Q&A feature and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And if you're on YouTube, please use the chat. Thank you, Ben, Natalie, and Matt, for being out there. And also, given how many people registered for this event in the tens of thousands, it's unlikely we'll be able to answer everything, but we are going to follow up with an email that has links to resources and the recording from this event. If you're not sure if you're registered, especially if you're over on YouTube and you're not sure if you're registered, there's a link pinned in the chat where you can make sure you get your details to us. We're also giving away a free Bird Academy course to three lucky attendees, and everyone who registers will receive a 50% off coupon for a discount on a Bird Academy course. All right, we have lots of people flooding in. This is great. I think we've spent enough time listening to the birds of upstate New York. I'm going to end this screen share and welcome in our guests. So, Ileana, Adriaan, why don't you go ahead and come on stage? Hello and welcome. It's my pleasure to welcome
Welcome.
Ileana Betancourt and Adriaan Dokter to our event today. It's great to see you both. Ileana and Adriaan both work for the Cornell Lab, and we're excited when I asked them to join me for the event. So I wondered if you could both share a few words about what you do here at the Cornell Lab and your birding background. Adriaan, why don't you go first?
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Adriaan Dokter. I'm a researcher here at the lab, and I'm mostly a migration researcher. So I study this sort of very special moment in birds' annual cycle, basically the spring and the fall when they're really on the move. And at the lab, I also lead the project BirdCast, which we'll talk more about today, where we observe and forecast migration, sort of like the weather report for birds. So more about that later, and I'll hand it over to Ileana. Oh, you're muted, Ileana.
Thank you. Rookie mistake. Um, hey everyone. My name's Ileana. I'm happy to be online with everyone today, celebrating migration. I worked at the lab for 5 years. I'm a member of the marketing team. My job is to help people feel welcome at the lab and curious about birds and help them discover all that there is to discover at the lab. And there's so much. I love spending time in nature. When it comes to birding, I mentioned this in the last webinar, I consider myself an advanced beginner. I'm still learning every single day, and it's such a joy to be at the lab learning about birds alongside others. And I'm based in the Philly area and enjoy hiking, soccer, and gardening. And also right now watching the birds as they come through. Enjoy the different elements of my garden too. So excited to be here. And thanks, Charles and Adriaan. Happy to be alongside you for this event.
Thanks, guys. Those are both great introductions to who you are. And I want to underscore something that both of you said. Like this is really a chance for us to enjoy birds and enjoy learning about birds enjoy hearing other people talk about birds, and for those of you in the audience, sharing the things about birds that you love as well. It's really our hope today that this live event will be an opportunity for everybody to, like I said, celebrate the birds that are around us, but also to gain a broader appreciation for what's happening with these birds around us. So how, what the scale and scope of migration is and why that's part of what makes it so cool when they just show up in our yards or in the spaces around us. And finally, we kind of hope that, after coming to something like this, you're just as inspired as we are to go out and both experience the birds around you wherever you are, as well as to share that with the people around you. And most of today's presentation is really going to focus on North America, on the Western Hemisphere. That's where a lot of the data that are used in some of the tools that we're going to talk about now were developed. But the bigger themes of what's happening during bird migration really operate almost at a global scale. Some of the reasons. So we're going to start out by trying to give you a sense of that scale, but then we're also going to have some time for Q&A throughout. So if you have questions, please throw them into the chat and we'll try and get to them as we can. Let's see if I can find my share bar again because everything is squished. Okay. So when we get to the idea of what does bird migration actually look like, part of it is we don't know what's happening around us very easily with these birds that are traveling all over the place, that are flying. And when we, sorry, I'm having some computer issues. When we start to think about the scale that this is happening at, um, it's really hard to comprehend. And so Adriaan was actually part of making this incredible visualization that we're going to show you in a moment here. And when you watch, I just want you to pay attention to the fact there's lots of different colors, lots of different dots covering essentially the Western Hemisphere. Each color kind of corresponds to a species, and each of those dots is sort of an abundance of that species moving. The video starts at the start of March and it goes through June, and it uses data from a variety of sources that we're going to talk a little bit about more in a bit. So let me play this video for you. It's about 30 seconds. So you can see the night line. You can see these different species colors. And for now, I wouldn't spend too much time worrying about what color means which species. Just look at these birds move and imagine what it would take to get the information needed to understand what's happening. Right? It's really an incredible amount of complexity. So I wonder, Ileana, after watching this, is there anything that sticks out to you or that you react to when you see this?
I think it just fills me with awe, the scale of migration. It's such a global phenomena, and seeing all those little dots, knowing that they represent an organism, a bird, is incredible. Like I just can't imagine making that journey. We have airplanes, but they're actually physically moving across continents, which is incredible.
How about you, Adriaan? I know we're going to talk a few more, we're going to get a few details about how this was made after this first section, but given that you were part of making this, is there something that sticks out to you either about what we just watched or what you learned through making it, something that surprised you?
Yeah, maybe I think that Ileana raises a good point, and I mean, I work with these kind of data every day, but I'm still also mind boggled by like just how many migratory birds there are. I mean, you see these little dots here on the screen for like maybe 15 species in this little animation. But we have hundreds of migratory birds in North America, so there's only a fraction what you see here, and it's just there's just so many birds migrating over the U.S. And I think one special thing in this map we also try to highlight maybe like the landscape that these birds migrate on. And most of them migrate at night, and you see this sort of map of the night light over the U.S. with all the different cities popping up. That's maybe also something we hope to show you with this illustration that these birds move over a landscape that we as humans have changed a lot, and yeah, a lot of night light that these birds are encountering in their big migrations. Um,
And to me, this is one thing, if you look at this map, here we are in June, essentially. Look at all the dots across essentially a huge swath of North America. These are the
yeah.
birds moving around us right now or about to be moving around us because this ends in June. And so this is what we're trying to say. Hey, there's cool stuff happening outside. You guys are showing up to something to talk about that cool stuff. And in this hour, hopefully together, we're going to look at some of that cool stuff, learn about where these birds are moving from, learn a few of the birds. We're going to answer a few questions. And we're also going to get to some really neat additional technology that you can bring to bear on whether, maximizing your chances of seeing what's going on around you. So,
Here we go.
so we're going to go through thinking about each of those dots as a species is kind of cool in the abstract, but it's also fun to look at some of these species in depth and get a closer look at who some of these characters are, as well as where they're coming from and where they're going. Some of them have already gotten to where they're going, some of them are moving through, some of them haven't even started yet. So as we go through a few examples of this, we'd love to hear from you in the chat about what your favorites that you're seeing about migration are, what you're looking forward to seeing, and hopefully some of those are going to overlap with some of these examples that we're showing. All right. So first off, this incredible little gem, the ruby-throated hummingbird. So when I was doing some reading prior to this, um, I was struck again by how tiny these birds are and the fact that they're migratory and they can fly hundreds to thousands of miles. This bird, I realized, weighs as much as half the amount of tea, dry tea, I put in my cup when I make a cup of tea.
That's crazy.
Um, so have either of you seen any hummingbirds coming into your neck of the woods?
Not yet.
Yeah,
I
I
also
have a
don't
nice.
have plans to attract them, I think, at my house. So got to work on that.
I have this
But
nice flowering quince in my yard that always starts to bloom right around when these guys arrive. So I don't even have to put out my hummingbird feeder, and they show up very early every year.
Oh,
that's awesome. We've just sort of seen we've had a single male coming to a couple of our feeders and hitting all the plants that are open so far, which is really fun, as well as sometimes going to the oranges that we have out for the Orioles, which is kind of interesting.
cool.
When we think about these hummingbirds, a lot of times when you look in a book or something, you're going to see a static range map for where they are. So the blue on this map represents where they are in the winter for the most part in their non-breeding season. The yellow is a swath of land where you might see them while they're migrating. And then that salmony red color is where they breed. Um, and this is good for showing kind of an overview of every place. But as we know, just even from that visualization that we just looked at, that changes over time. They might migrate earlier or later in the year. And so one thing that the lab has been a part of making through all the data that we've been able to amass through programs like eBird and other things are weekly abundance maps. These are maps that show where the birds basically should be each week moving through time through the spring. So you can see right now, this is a map of North America. If you look on the right of this, there's a little color bar there that goes from orange to like dark purple. So orange is less abundant, dark purple is more abundant. And then there's a bar beneath that that shows you which week of the year. And right now it's sitting right on March. That little dark thing, we're going to go March through June. So let's take a look at where and how these hummingbirds move. So you can see right now they're in Central America and a little bit of Florida. So you can see they move from in some cases across the Gulf of Mexico into most of Eastern North America, which is amazing to think of that tiny bird flying across um, the Gulf of Mexico. Let's look at a different map. Oh, so this is a map I threw out here. Adriaan, I wondered if everybody can see this, pretty much the entire wintering range of this bird is on some islands in the Caribbean. Any guesses on? I covered up which species this is, just to see if anybody in the chat might know too, um, what species this might be. So this is the winter range of this species. Any guesses? See a few out there. We'll be sending you some links to these, by the way, but it's something called the eBird status and trends maps. So this bird migrates up through the eastern US and all across to most of the boreal forest and is this beautiful character here, Cape May warbler.
That's beautiful. I forgot which bird it was, and I know we went over this when we were practicing. um, yeah, it's gorgeous. I can't believe it has such a big distance it travels. And why is it called the Cape May warbler?
Do you remember this story, Adriaan?
Yeah, wasn't it that the first Cape May warbler that was described was found in Cape May? I believe that is that right?
That's correct. I think it was by Alexander Wilson too, like one of the premier ornithologists of his time. Um, and yet it's not a bird that breeds in Cape May, right? As we saw from that map, it goes quite a ways north.
Passes over.
Yes, we are stopover country for this bird. And there were actually a couple of these, at least a couple out in Sapsucker Woods today at the Lab of Ornithology.
Very cool.
This is actually a bird that's doing quite well as well, like increasing a lot. You might, if you live in the Northeast, you might actually see more of them in recent years. And we think that's because of there's these spruce budworm outbreaks in the boreal forests, like lots of food for them to breed. So they've been doing very well in the last 5 to 10 years. And I noticed it in my backyard actually. I've seen quite a lot of them in
Oh,
recent years.
to keep an eye out for that.
And this is also, I think, a good one where if you can learn that song, they tend to sing a lot. At least when I've seen them, when I've personally seen them, I feel them like they vocalize a fair bit. And so it's a great way to know that it's out there. Like if you have your window open, you run outside to check it out. Um, this next bird, Ileana, is one of the ones you said is your favorites. Let me play this video.
Yes. Beautiful. Yeah, the black and white warbler. It's warblers for me are generally hard to identify. I haven't mastered it yet. I need to take the Bird Academy course on it. But this one's easier because it's black and white like a zebra, and its name directly correlates with its look very directly. I often end up seeing it when I'm camping or hiking in the spring. I feel like I remember the first time I saw it, it was really easy to identify it using the identification tools at the lab. I think at the time it was the Merlin site ID that existed when I first saw it.
Yeah.
It's such a cool bird, yeah. Like it also what one cool thing about this bird is that if you ever see them, you don't see them sitting on. You actually often see them just walking over vertically, like kind of like a brown creeper. So they behave. They sort of have evolved to be these basically sort of like a brown creeper. So walk over the bark of trees and trying to look for little insects there. It's just very cool to see how like evolution kind of came to a new or came to sort of a good strategy multiple times, but on totally different lines of the evolutionary tree. I mean, tree like brown creepers and this black and white warbler are not related at all, but they show kind of almost the same behavior, which is really interesting.
Yeah,
Very
so
cool.
both from a behavioral perspective and from a plumage perspective, these guys are pretty striking and they act almost unlike a lot of other birds. Plus, they're really aggressive. They tend to chase off other birds if they get close to them. Let's see what we have next here. Here's our little warbler map. So you can see one cool thing about black and white warblers is that they winter in the southeastern US. Okay, so you can see all through Florida, most of Mexico, or a good chunk of Mexico, Central America, and then a Caribbean. So we have a bird that's, overlapping with that Cape May warbler we just looked at, but it's also well spread across the region. Let's see where he goes. And so in this case, spread across still the boreal forest, but in much of the leafy forests of the east as well. Which again, for these birds that are basically wintering in the same place, making evolutionarily different decisions basically about where they're headed at the end of it. This is a bird that's near and dear to my heart, the gray catbird. Let's listen to him make his famous sound. Every time I hear a gray catbird, it cracks me up. Um, and the fact there seem to be a lot of them around, at least where we live.
Yeah, same with the Philly area. We see them all the time. And I just feel like they're a buddy. They're a buddy outside. They come and they hang out while you're gardening and they hope to eat all your strawberries and blueberries if you don't cover them up. And they're just there and curious. And I feel like they look at you and they're very interactive, it seems.
And I also love just their understated beauty, just the slaty grayness of their plumage with their little jaunty black cap. And then when you see them head to leave, the russet kind of red of their undertail is really impressive. Um, this is another bird that, again, is a little bit like our black and white warbler in that we have birds wintering in the southeast, birds down in Mexico and the Caribbean. And as they move, you can see they don't go anywhere near as far north as that black and white warbler did, right? But they spend a lot of time through a lot of the same places, broadly speaking, in the lower 48. And here, what can we say about thrushes before I play this? What should people be expecting? If you've never heard of Swainson's thrush before, Adriaan, Ileana, anything you want to prepare people to hear here?
Ooh, it's such a weird sound. I go, it's like a little metallic. I don't know. I think we should just listen to it. It's
Yeah,
quite special.
let the bird speak for itself. Here we go. Such a special sound and honestly very spot on for how a lot of viewing thrushes is. The way that video was taken essentially through a branch, spiraling, ethereal. Um,
Magical.
It is an ethereal
They're
bird.
magical.
Also, think if you think about where these guys, we see that maybe in the map later, but it's one of those birds that you maybe don't see very often. But if you ever happen to go outside on a good migration night in the fall or in the spring, and you listen, these birds give these little contact notes or little flight calls at night. And the Swainson thrush is one of the birds that you hear most often. They sound like a little spring peeper, like beep. So it's like what, and if you go out on some good migration nights, you hear them just all the time, and it's sort of like this bird is so incredibly common actually, but it's also very secretive. I guess it's the most common flight call of birds that you hear at night, which is really sets kind of very special. And then they go to these very special places. Their song is ethereal, but they go also to these cloud forests and sort of mid to high elevation areas of the Andes. Totally different world. But that's where these birds maybe spend most of the
right.
time of the year. Yeah.
Yeah, and you can see that in this map, they stretch all the way down the Andes into northern Argentina. And let's watch just how they spread across North America, thinking about them being one of these most numerous species that you hear, like Adrian had mentioned. I mean, it just is this giant thrust up through the United States and into Canada and all across the boreal forest into Alaska. I mean, amazing. Argentina to north of Fairbanks, Alaska. All right, I have one more quiz question for people. This is another map one, which is kind of fun. This bird has a very particular wintering range. All the way down, you can see that purple spot, very weakly abundant. Their weekly abundance is very high, start of March, down in northeastern Argentina, as well as some other countries. Any guesses in the chat as to what this bird is? Which species?
If there's any Star Wars fans in the audience, this bird sounds like R2D2.
It does. That's a great. Um, and we do see a bunch of questions in the chat about birds migrating at night. We are going to get there for sure. Oh, I see someone in the chat mentioning Bobolink, which see Kirtland's Warbler, Baltimore Oriole, um, Woodcock. So let's go ahead and play this. We can see where they go. So they're in Argentina, and all of a sudden, I just want to point out there's no dots that are seen between Argentina until they hit the United States. Let me go back again. Watch this purple go from there to where it breeds. Like the first time we see more dots is in Florida. So this species travels so far. And as many people, and it's in the grasslands primarily. This is our bobolink. So great guesses in the chat. And let's take a look and listen to this guy. And you've done some work with bobolinks around here, right, Adrian?
Yeah, we try to do a little bit about bobolink conservation here on the Cornell campus. It's always bobolinks are maybe one of the true grassland birds, and if we think about grassland birds, and maybe unsurprisingly, that they like the sort of the interactions between humans and grassland birds are very pronounced. There's a lot of birds that, and also the bobolink, it used to be like prairie bird, and then sort of in the 1900s expanded a lot towards the northeast sort of to make use of the hay fields that we had here. And now with like earlier mowing because of climate change and also because we put fertilizers on our land that make things grow earlier and more productive agriculture, a lot of these birds are being disturbed when they're nesting. So it's a very complicated problem. We need agriculture, but these birds use also our agricultural lands. So yeah, if you think about species of migratory birds in decline, it's like the grassland birds are the group that is in steepest decline, and especially bobolink as well. And yeah, it is a very bird that's very dear to my heart. But yeah, some birds that we really have to think about and think about solutions like how we can live together with these birds for it to be able to persist.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it's great to have you working as well on and this in addition to all the other things that you're involved with at the lab. Ileana, is this a bird you've had the joy of coming across?
Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you. I have not. It's a much newer bird to me, as more of a beginner birder, and it's really cool looking with the dark underside and looks like someone painted some bright yellow and white on its back. So it's one that in its migration patterns looks very unique to me, and I look forward to learning more about.
Yeah, and I think this is another one of those birds when you go for walks on big grass fields around, hay meadows, that kind of a thing. Hearing that sound is like it travels quite a ways, and
Mm,
it's something definitely to listen for um, if you're out there looking for bobolinks, because it's one of the things that they really stick out.
I will be now. Yeah, I have to
Well,
check and see when it passes through my way.
yeah, they might even breed near you. And that's we're gonna check out some ways where people can learn how to best figure that out too. So I'm gonna play this visualization one more time here, and I just wanted everybody to like we've looked at a few of the birds that are doing this, but again, sort of sit back and imagine this journey and what it must take the next time you're looking at some of these beautiful birds that are just around us, whether they're residents or they're passing through, and um, hopefully look upon it with some newfound kind of wonder and curiosity too about how can they do it? From the tiniest little hummingbird to something like a bobolink making these tremendous long distance flights.
Yeah, we can understand these maps now a little better too, now that we've looked at these distribution maps that you showed earlier, Charles. This is not just a pretty animation, it's actually our best guess of what the routes are of these individuals in the sky and how they fly over the Gulf of Mexico. These are not made up. They're really consistent with these maps, and they're actually built on top of these distribution maps that we showed earlier. But in this information, it's really nice to have the routes as well, because then we can see how they overfly, for example, the Gulf of Mexico and other areas. So we're really trying to add some information there and get our best guess of what the routes are of these individuals.
Thanks for that, Adrian. So I'm going to kill the screen share for a second here and let you guys see us without the screen share. And just to say, if for everyone who might be arriving to this migration in your backyard live event, um, we're just getting started. We're about halfway in, and we've just been celebrating some of our favorite migrant species and how they got here. A reminder, I'm Charles Eldermeyer. I'm the host today, and I'm joined by two other Cornell Lab staff, Adriaan, Dokter, and Ileana Betancourt. And it has been super fun reading through the observations and questions being posted in the chat. And we thought we'd spend a couple moments here on screen trying to answer some of the most common questions. So one that's come up a number of times is why do birds migrate? Or how did migration evolve? When we look at how big and complicated this visualization that we just watched, for example, and even those individual range maps, what do we know about, or what do we think about why birds migrate and why it evolved?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's one reason, and it's a very common thing on our planet, right? It's not just birds, there's also mammals and whales and like insects. It's a very common thing in on our planet, and a lot of birds, but especially birds do it a lot, and I think that's because they learned how to fly. So in that sense, they move relatively cheaply. It doesn't take a lot for them to move around. So that's I think why it's so common in birds. And then the reason is probably twofold. On the one hand, when it becomes spring, there's this all this growth and new life and food, therefore for these birds. So it's a really good place to raise your young, and there's a lot of food available all of a sudden in the long summers with all this daylight. But the sort of the reverse of that is in the winter, it gets darker and there's a real danger for adult birds to actually, if you stay there, it gets pretty cold, so you have to get out of there. So it's sort of this tricky balance between, on the one hand, reproduction of birds, and on the other hand, their survival. And birds have found different strategies to deal with that. And um, yeah, migration has become extremely common in birds. So over three-quarters of the species here in North America is migratory to some extent. So it's not an exception. It's really the rule where we live.
That makes a lot of sense. Um, so similar to that first question about why migrate, um, what is there sort of an overview of like what do we know about what makes birds migrate? So we have these causes you just said, sort of like the food. So what about what triggers, I guess? What triggers migration in birds? What's known about that?
Yeah, there's some cool lab experiments also. Like they honestly get restless. So they've done experiments of birds in migratory birds, and when the light gets shorter and shorter, that's what you think. Like light is probably a very important trigger with the day length either shortening or lengthening now in spring. That their whole physiology starts to change, and then their organs might shrink, their muscles increase, and then they just get restless and they just have to go. And you see that basically if you have migratory birds in captivity, that they actually start hopping around at night and hopping into the direction where they want to go. So it's really baked in there, and it's really a primal instinct of these birds. They gotta go. Yeah.
And there's a term for that, right?
Yeah, it's called like there's a German word. It's called Zugenruhe, if I pronounce it properly, like which just basically means migratory restlessness. Yeah. So, oh,
So I
this is
just threw up,
fun. You have a
yeah, so I just
cartoon
threw up
about
this
this.
this graphic by Rosemary Mosco, who who produced it for Living Bird and also has a really popular webcomic series called Bird and Moon. But Zugenruhe, migratory restlessness. When songbirds are ready to migrate, they literally cannot sit still. So you have one bird speaking to another. I'm so antsy lately. I wonder what that means. And the other bird says, it means you're about to fly thousands of perilous miles over land and sea. First bird, no, that's preposterous. It's true. Ha, sure. We'll see about that later that night. Well, darn it. And so this actually leads to another question, because and if you like these style comics about the natural world, you can check them all out at rosemarymosco.com. Um, but if we look at that last frame, and if we look at the visualization we watched, and if we think about some of the comments you've already made, Adriaan, many birds migrate at night, right?
Yeah, it might be surprising, but actually, it's a pretty hidden phenomenon, and like they really, like almost 80% of species prefer to fly at night with their migrations, and also like they are often like several thousand feet up, so you might not even hear them or see them. So they typically depart after sunset and they land again at sunrise. So a pretty hidden phenomenon. And I still get like there's probably a lot of bird lovers on this call, but I am aware like most of my friends or people when I tell them that birds migrate at night, people had no idea that there's actually millions, billions of birds flying over their heads every season.
And this is a cool, I don't know if it shows up that well on the Zoom
Yeah,
screen
it
share.
looks cool. It looks great.
Yeah. What do you see there, Ileana?
I see birds flying across the moon in some sort of stop motion style photography.
Yeah.
Almost a Halloween type of image, but it's really cool.
And this is one of the ways that people found out birds were migrating at night, right? They train a telescope on the moon, and you can actually see
Yeah.
them sometimes flying
Wow.
across the moon face. And so these are sort of multiple exposure pictures from the moon. So we did have a question you'd mentioned, Adriaan. How high are they flying?
Yeah, yeah, several thousand feet, maybe. Yeah, it can be up to several kilometers, so it's pretty high. And like these moonlight surveys, that was one of the oldest ways in which people quantified migration. They just looked with a telescope at the moon and then counted how often a bird flew in front of it. And that's how they first got the sort of estimates of the scale of migration. You know, the moon is very tiny, tiny piece of airspace. If you would scale it up, they already saw like, oh, that must be humongous. There must be millions of birds migrating every night. Now it's very different. We have so many cool scientific tools to actually observe this.
Which we are going to talk in depth about. So that actually gets into there was a question from the chat about whether or not there's anything known about differences in who migrates first. So males versus females, for example, or why one species might be migrating before another species does in the spring.
Yeah, I mean, there's huge differences between species, and I would say. One big difference is between short and long distance migrants. So the ones that are further away, they typically arrive here also a little later, versus other ones that are more temperate, like are your sparrows and sort of birds that winter more within the US. They can also sense the weather very well close to where they are. So they often, when it turns nice, they immediately respond to it, and they might be early. And so there's huge differences between species just because of the different strategies that these birds have. You do see often that males tend to migrate, for some species at least, migrate a little earlier. You know, they have to defend their territories and they often fight already about for the good places. And then the 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 ladybirds, the women arrive a little bit later, and then the males often have already their territories to some extent established. So that's something you see quite often. Yeah.
And then when it comes to getting from point A to point B, what are the birds using to actually wind up where they want to, both in terms of navigation, but also um, efficiency, getting there without sort of hitting empty. There may not be a gas station depending on,
No,
so what are
no.
what's sort of the constellation of ways that they use to get there?
Yeah, I mean there are still a lot of questions around that, but they're really good in sensing all kinds of information. They we know that they look at the stars and the moon, and they use that for orientation. They have another magnetic sense, actually two different types. One in their beak that's truly magnetic, and they can also see the magnetic field in their eyes with another magnetic sense. Um, so yeah, to exactly say they probably integrate a lot of information that allows them to sort of know where they are, like almost like a GPS. A lot to discover there still, but and then for their travels, a lot of these songbirds they have strategy where they fly and they just want to, of course, get a cheap ride if they can, they want to be not waste any energy. So that we see this very close relationship between the weather and especially winds and when bird migration happens. So often when they fly maybe two or three times their actual airspeed that they can fly themselves, just because they get a huge boost from the winds. So for that, they have to be huge, very good weather forecasters and sort of be able to know the atmosphere and all the winds up aloft, very high in the sky. Somehow they are able to sense this and make use of it. So they're pretty amazing little birds.
That is incredible. I knew that they used magnetics, but I didn't realize there were multiple magnetic systems that they used.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think
Um,
in pop culture you hear a lot about spidey senses, but I feel like we need a hero that has bird senses. See how that plays out.
yeah, you can imagine. I mean, flight would be one of their superpowers, most certainly, right?
Yeah, and being in tune with the geomagnetic field.
That is just really spectacular. So I want to remind folks we've got about an hour with you. There's thousands of you out there, and you're asking lots of good questions. We aren't going to be able to answer all of them during the webinar right now. We still have people in the chat working to try and answer your questions as well. But we also want to get to a few more things that we think you'll be interested in. And we're going to send you all kinds of information about migration and the birds around you. So if you haven't registered, hit that link in the chat. Should be in a pinned chat, and keep asking questions, and we'll try and get to as many of them as we can. But I wanted to pivot back to some prepared content that we have to try and make sure you guys have what we think is a nice set of kind of strategies and tools to hopefully tune into that bird migration happening around you. Um, I think a lot of you have probably heard of Merlin, potentially are Merlin users. If you're a Merlin user out in the chat, I'm looking over at my chat right now. If you're a Merlin user out there, feel free to give a shout out to Merlin. Um, I do wonder, we have sort of an expert bird scientist and someone who calls themselves sort of a an advanced beginner or still learning, right? But how do you guys use Merlin during this migration season?
I use it to help me know it's around. I think I sat outside and I picked up out in my backyard and I picked up about 18 species, some of which I didn't know were around, like the magnolia warbler. So it just starts out by giving me awareness and then it allows me to know what to look out for just in my neighborhood.
How about you, Adrian?
Well, to be honest, I also sometimes just use it, yeah, to just like there's some of these birds that migrate through here and they breed in boreal Canada, right? So I get to see them only like a few weeks singing in the year, 2, 3 weeks. And then often I have to be honest, I just forget what they where they sounded again. So every spring I use it as a little reminder what the different birds sounded like. And it's so helpful. It immediately tells you also gives you some feedback on what's singing in real time. So it's a really good learning tool. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it takes out that loop where I have to have some songs loaded up on my phone, listen, I think that's this, and then find it in my MP3s or whatever and listen again, wait for it to call. So this is always going to be a really great first step. If you can just get outside, or if you can leave it running near the window, sometimes I'll even just set it in the window in the spring. And if it sees something if it notices something, I will basically drop everything and go outside to try and make sure I don't miss it. But it can be as simple as like during this time of year when the birds are moving, taking your cup of coffee outside in the morning for just like 15 minutes, or stopping in a park along the way to work for 15 minutes and just seeing what you run across. Because really, like Adriaan said, you have somebody who studies bird migration, who's an expert in bird migration and understands you have weeks at most to potentially see some of these species until next year, or certainly until the fall, but they might look different.
Now's
Um,
the time. Now's the time to get out there.
yeah,
Okay.
it's just so great when they're moving. So one big challenge then is how do you know when the birds might be migrating nearby? Merlin can help you know who might be there right then. But what if you could essentially, the same way we plan our activities around the weather, what if you could plan your birding? If you have one day in a week where you might be able to get out and spend a half hour in a park, what if there's a tool, and I'm setting this up, what if there was a tool that
Hmm.
might allow you to understand what's being predicted for when birds are migrating? And this image on the right, do you want to describe what this image is, Adriaan?
Yeah, this is one of the forecasts of our project BirdCast, and it
And
kind
this
of
is
tells you in the colors like where birds are going to be migrating. And this is for tonight. So if you're kind of in the Midwest, all those bright white colors, it seems there's going to be a lot of movement there. If you are where I am in New York, maybe not the best night tonight.
so I'm going to stop this screen share just to switch because we're going to switch over to a browser so we can actually take a look exactly at um, Birdcast. And so if you were to go to birdcast.org, this is what would greet you. And today there's a whole lot of information here, and we've got about 15 minutes left. What I want to make sure you guys can find is this tab where it says migration tools. Or you can hit this button down here where it says migration tools. So I'm actually going to start with this forecast map. So this is what we were just looking at. And one thing that you mentioned, Adriaan, was sort of where it's predicting migration to be most busy, right? You were saying in the Midwest there.
Mhm.
But I also want to point out in that lower left, that number. What does that number represent? Um, which I don't think you mentioned on the last slide.
Right, yeah. Because that gives you like a reminder of just an enormous scale of migration. So th this is the number of birds that we predict to be actively flying, sort of around 3 hours after sunset, which is kind of like the peak of the nocturnal migration. It typically happens around 3 hours after sunset. So, this is not even it can even be much more, but just think about that 343 million birds actively flying in that region. It's just
Yeah, go ahead, Ileana.
mind-boggling.
I just have a comment on that number. It happens to be about the same population of the US. So imagine everyone in the US flying over the US tonight.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Yeah.
That's nuts. And also just to think, how many birds do we think migrate in a spring season total from the start of migration to the end?
Yeah, so I think like along the southern border, we have about 4 billion birds coming into the country, but then there's a lot of birds also that winter within the US. So I don't know it from the top of my head, but it must be in the order of 10, 15 billion birds at least in North America and Canada that are on the move in the
Wow,
spring. So like it's many more birds, migratory birds, than there are Americans and Canadians
combined,
in this
yeah.
area. Yeah.
Um, and so that's the forecast for the entire country. There's also a tab here for your local dashboard. And for this, you put in your state or county. Should I just go with Tompkins County, or where should we look at today, Adriaan?
Well, maybe let's go to North Dakota. You can do a state or a county, but we had some really good migration in the Dakotas last night. Um,
Okay, so walk us through what we're seeing here.
Yeah, so this is actual data. Like what the BirdCast project uses is a sort of a network of weather radars that's all across the US. It's the same weather radars that measure like precipitation or tornadoes or hurricanes. Basically, radars that the meteorologists use, but these radars also see birds, and we have sort of used that to make an observation network for migratory birds. And so what we see in a big top number on the top left, that's sort of the big number of like how many birds flew over this area all across North Dakota. So our estimate was for last night that 85 million birds crossed North Dakota in a single night. So a huge number.
Mm.
Um, and you
That's
see this little
incredible.
high flag that it says high there, means this is really in the top 10% of nights for this year. Um, and then we also have the peak migration traffic on the right. That's how many birds were sort of in flight, the sort of the record for that night. So how many birds were actively flying at any given point above North Dakota?
Yeah, this
So
is
that was
just North Dakota.
yeah. So that
Yeah,
was 66 billion. And of course, the birds overfly it, so that's why often the crossing number is often higher than sort of the peak number.
Mhm.
I also think
Wow.
it's interesting here. You can see the birds were averaging 65 miles per hour at an
Yeah,
altitude of 1,800 feet. And so it's just neat that you're
Five,
taking, what's that? Say that again?
65 miles an hour. Wow, that is
yeah. So
fast.
they must have had a good wind, right? Because birds
Yeah,
they cannot fly that fast.
highway
So they
speed.
had they had a good tailwind, and that's probably the reason why it was such a good night. There was
Mm.
the winds lined up, good tailwind, and all these birds thought, oh, I'm gonna fly this night because it saves me half the energy to
Mhm.
fly.
Right? Like you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot of other information on this slide. One thing that I think is really interesting is this panel where it says, so far this season, birds in flight, nightly average. So we can see where that night was for last night, really big night. We can also see that earlier, May 10th, there was another big night, it looked like, for this spot. And then down here, total birds crossed. You have this curve. What does that curve represent compared to this dot where we are right now?
Yeah, so always the gray areas that you see in these graphs, that's sort of the multi-year average. So you can sort of see where are we relative to the multi-year average. So on average in North Dakota, we have like 550 million birds flying over at the end of the gray line. So we're a little over halfway. So there's still a good amount of migration to come, but yeah, more than half has passed already. Yeah, this is it's almost like a research dashboard. You can go sleuth here yourself. You can also go back many years, look when the big flights were, see the flight altitudes and the speeds. It's really you can really get lost in this. So if you cannot go outside or for whatever reason or at night, it's a fun thing to explore.
That's
And
right.
this thing is live also. So at night you see them. We're sure now in daytime mode, but if you come back here at night, you get the actual number of birds aloft at that moment, as measured by the radars.
And then the last thing that I think people, again, trying to think about, oh, when should I go out? What might be around? I really like this panel down on the right that pulls in data from eBird about when people are typically seeing birds in that geographic location. And this is giving us a list of the expected nocturnal migrants for last night in North Dakota.
Yeah. See our little Swainson thrush that you never see is up there.
Yeah, and
That's
you
already
have
moving.
we have our black and white warbler, we have catbirds moving, Swainson's thrush up here. So to me, this is sort of like it's sort of like a little special hidden it's opening up a world that we can't see with our own eyes. And I follow the weather like, you know, obsessively when it comes to like planning things to do. And the idea that I can plan if I want to make sure I go outside and have my coffee the day after a really big predicted migration for my area is fun. It's something fun to like call up my friends and be like, "Hey, let's go out tomorrow. There's supposed to be a big flight tonight."
Exactly, yeah.
I have a
Um,
question about that, the expected birds to see. So they're
yeah,
moving through at night, at high speeds in this case. When do they sleep? Do they rest? Or because if you're going to see them and it's during the day, are they going to be eating and building up energy for the next flight, or are they snoozing? What happens? How do they rest?
It's a great
Yeah,
question. Go
yeah,
ahead.
early in the morning, you see a lot of migratory birds and you see them immediately foraging, right, and eating. It's the most active time. So it's not that they go for a nap right after they arrived. I think they really take the opportunity to forage and fuel up as much as they can. And then once they have a full tummy, I think then that's probably when they sleep. And that's often why, in the middle of the day, it can be so quiet with birds. You don't see
Um,
anything. But they are there. I think they're probably just taking a nap and resting for the next flight. And a lot of these small songbirds have a strategy like that, where you fly at night and then forage during the day. And that's probably also another reason why birds migrate at night is just very time efficient. You can they need to need to forage with their eyes, and at night they cannot forage, so you might as well fly. In addition, it's safer and calmer winds, all kinds of reasons, but that's another reason.
that
And the
makes
last
sense.
thing I wanted to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Ileana.
No, that makes sense. Very interesting. Yeah, thanks.
One last thing I just wanted to point out is there are also migration alerts, and you can subscribe to those by email, and you can search by city about these alerts that help make sure that you know when there's likely to be a big pulse of birds coming through.
Yeah, and we rolled this out over the whole country actually this spring. So there's always going to be a city about 100 miles from where you live, and you can don't worry about the distance of 100 miles because most big migrations are very large scale. So the nearest city will still be pretty good for where you live. And then you get, whenever there's a high migration forecasted by our models, you get a little reminder email that it's going to be happening that night.
So we are about just under 5 minutes left, excuse me. And I wanted to make sure that people knew what was coming next. So you've had a chance to learn about some really interesting species, hopefully. You've gotten a little bit of information about, hopefully, making you even more curious about what these birds are doing, how far they're traveling, how it all works. If you're interested in learning more, we have new video that's coming out that just was released today that covers some of these species, both on their wintering grounds during their migration and on their breeding grounds. There's a new set of migration resources on our allaboutbirds.org website to learn all about different migration. And we're going to send you links to this stuff if we have your email. So please make sure you register if you're interested in getting this stuff along with a link to the recording. Um, I also thought we'd touch briefly on some things you can do to help birds during migration. Um, Turning off lights at night during migration season. Adriaan told us about how birds use the stars, among other things, to migrate, to orient. Lights can be deadly to birds, both misleading them and guiding them to places they should not be. Treating windows to reduce bird collisions so that birds aren't running into windows where there are reflections primarily. And as we started out with, sharing your knowledge, wonder, and enthusiasm with your family and friends. If you want to learn more about how you can work to both help lights get turned off and how to treat your windows, you can check out stopbirdcollisions.org. We also have one more live event coming up next month, June 18th, titled How to Support Birds All Summer Long, where we'll be talking about both the cool birds that are still arriving and what they're doing, as well as what the birds around you are doing and how you can set yourself up for a great summer of birding and watching the birds and being there for them. Um, before we go, I wanted to hopefully have everybody join me in thanking Ileana and Adriaan for spending this time with us all today, um, getting a better sense of what birds are doing on migration and how we can all make sure we embrace the return of the birds of spring. Um, any last thoughts from both of you?
No, go outside. It's not, this is the time, and it's really nice out. I mean, I had some cool warblers in my yard already this morning again. It's really good at the moment, and for the next two weeks, it's still gonna be spectacular.
Yeah, I agree. Seize the moment, get outside, enjoy the birds that are passing by while you can, and enjoy the ones that are just settling in for the season.
And so remember too, we will be following up with winners of our Bird Academy course giveaway. We'll be sending out the links to this recording as well as to the resources. And anybody who's registered who attended today will also get a coupon for 50% off any Bird Academy course. If you like learning about birds in this kind of community, I want to make sure you know that you can help support bird conservation and engaging people about birds just like this through your support of the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And you can learn more about how you can make a difference at birds.cornell.edu. Big thanks to everybody who joined us in the conversation. I keep on looking over at the chat because it keeps on moving and people are saying different things, fun things. Really loved having a conversation with you about these birds of spring and feeling this sense of community. So, as both of our guests said, get out there and bird, get out there and just see what's happening around you, share it with your friends, and welcome those birds back. And hopefully, we'll see you at the event in June. Thanks again, everyone. And thank you, Ileana and Adriaan. Take
Thanks,
care.
Thanks,
Bye,
Adriaan. Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.